everyone, and welcome to episode 108 of the Retrospectives podcast, Bad Mojo. My name is Patrick Arthur, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, James Sterlings. James, would you like me to tell you a little bit about Bad Mojo and why I chose this? Had you ever heard of this game before?
Absolutely not, although I'm kind of surprised I hadn't, because it's not exactly a forgettable game.
It is a very weird one, though, and unlike most weeks where there's some kind of nostalgic connection or a user has suggested a game to us, this one was entirely based off my own research. I was sprawling, I was browsing through the internet looking for, I guess, unique and interesting games of the 90s, specifically PC games. I don't know, I was kind of in the mood for something like that. And out of the blue for 1996, I saw this weird ass game called Bad Mojo. And the whole premise of this game and the reason that caught my attention is that you play as a cockroach. That's right, not as a human being, not as a tank, not as a plane, as a cockroach. And I think that recently, in particular, we've had a lot of discussions about player vulnerability. And I was thinking, what could be more vulnerable than being a cockroach?
And what could be less marketable than being playing as a cockroach either?
Yeah, that is true. It's not exactly a power fantasy.
I struggle to see a game like this coming out in the modern era. Like, it is such a hard sell to make your protagonist so revolting to look at for the whole runtime of the game.
Yeah, it's not just you that's revolting, it's the entire deliberate aesthetic of this game. I do think something that is kind of appealing about this, and it took a while for this to click to me, is just being a small thing in a regular environment. Katamari Damacy is the other game where we've kind of done where the earlier levels are similar to this. But one of my favorite puzzle games of the modern era, Superland, does exactly the same thing. And there's something about this idea that just I find like appealing on some deep level of being a small thing in a big environment.
Did you ever play the Toy Story PS1 game?
I did
Or,
not,
like,
but is it the same kind of idea?
it's basically that. You're just a toy in the house and everything's massive and hard to traverse. And there's something really enjoyable about it because the level structure is so, obviously real. It just kind of like, like it does the world building and it satisfies the gameplay and the level design at the same time. And it's really fun seeing the devs like make interesting levels out of really mundane things.
Yeah, there was also a Counter-Strike 1.6 custom map called D-Rats, which was the exact same thing, where the level was massive and it was just a bedroom.
Pikmin?
Pikmin, yeah, Pikmin's another good example. So it's obviously a pretty common one. It's not exactly that part of the game isn't unique, but it's still interesting, and it just any game that's set in this setting, I think, is quite cool. So, for those who've never listened to us before, we are the Retrospectives podcast. What we do each and every 3 weeks is we play through a retro game that's at least 15 years old with the intention of discovering if it's truly stood the test of time. We're not here to understand these games in the context in which they're produced or appreciate and reflect upon the things that this game laid the groundwork for. We simply want to know how enjoyable is this game to play when evaluated side by side with any other game that gets released. We admit this is a harsh standard of criticism, but we also think that it's the best way to see which games have done something unique and interesting and artistic that has makes them worth playing above and beyond their historical value. So over the past 3 weeks, we played Bad Mojo. More specifically, we played Bad Mojo Redux. The first game was originally released in 1996, developed by Pulse Entertainment. So we played the 2004 re-release Redux, which basically gets the game up and running for modern systems and also has a HD upscaling of the FMV sequences and is true color instead of 256 color. It's the same game in every other respect. It's just that the original, getting that running on a Windows machine today would be basically impossible. There was some weird jankiness to this release, though. James, you had something to say about the menus, right?
Yeah, so it's a bit odd. Like, when you save the game, it brings up like a Windows file browser to make a little file in like an arbitrary folder. It feels a bit like bootleg, honestly. Even the main menu, like the controls, the settings menu, it pops up like a Windows 98 gray box with some really Visual Basic tier radio buttons. It's not like anything has been modernized whatsoever. I think you were saying maybe it's the Redux that makes it like this way, but it
Possibly. I mean, I think that when we think of remakes today, we think of stuff like the Resident 4 Evil remake, like remakes that professionally make the game as user friendly as possible. This isn't quite that kind of tier of remake. It's more that they put it together to get it running, and they kind of cut corners on making it the most possible user friendly experience
it's
possible.
yeah, well, they at least like put the effort in where it counts. Like when you're actually playing the game, you just can't notice any corners being cut whatsoever. There's the only like major technical flaw that caused me actual inconvenience is that it seems like sometimes when you save the game or go to the main menu, when you load back into the game, sometimes it moves your character's position on the screen quite significantly, even changing screens. And this, in one particular instance, there was a section where I needed to solve a very small puzzle in order to cross a gap to get to the next area. So you need to push something onto some liquid to make a bridge. I closed the menu to save, and then when I opened the menu, my character was on the other side of the bridge, but the bridge hadn't been pushed over the water, so I like didn't think too much of it at the time. So I played for another like 20 minutes, and then once I came back and had to go back over the bridge, I realized, I hadn't pushed the bridge, so I'm like stuck and I had to reload a save and do that whole section again. So yeah, be aware of that. The game's menu is very janky, and it actually can lead you to like positions where if you're not constantly saving, your game might break. So
Yeah, you can soft lock. I had a bit where I was soft locking inside a spider web, which you can't move in at all in this game. Luckily, I have learned my lesson, and I had 8 rolling saves, so any mistakes were not
yeah,
too
save
painful for
often
me.
for
But
this one. Make
yeah,
separate
and rolling
saves. Yeah.
saves is the critical thing. Yeah, and that's something that I've been doing for probably at least the last 60 to 70 episodes now, just because I know the dangers of only having
Yeah,
a single
every
save
single
with these
save I
games.
had was a different file. I had like 30 saves by the end of the game or something. Just do that.
Yeah, but for the most part, the game does work. I think that there are some control issues which we'll get into later, but I think that falls under the gameplay umbrella rather than being a bug.
Yep.
Um,
Ooh, a bug.
just like you're a bug. Yeah, I know. This is going to be nearly as bad as the being under enormous pressure when we're talking about Dark Midian
Wow, I can't
Dynasty.
believe we finally played a game more buggy than Prince of Persia Warrior Within. Yeah.
Terrible. So we're going to get into a basic setup for this game, and then we're going to launch into our first topic. So the basic setup of this game, which is told through a truly incredible monologue by the opening character as it zooms in on his apartment, is you're playing as a guy called Roger Sams who has robbed or otherwise is money laundered money off his company through trickery or otherwise, and he has $1 million in a briefcase. He's ready to leave for Mexico. Right as he's about to leave, though, he grabs his mother's locket, which he nearly forgot. His mother's locket opens up, says some random gibberish, and he gets transformed into a cockroach, making him have to navigate his way through his gross apartment and gross tenancy with as a cockroach instead of as a human being. I think the implicit goal of the game when you first start like this is to turn back into a human, but you're not really given a clear path on how you're going to achieve it. You just kind of get this mystic nonsense spat at you, and you kind of have to do things related to the mystic nonsense in order to progress through the game. But those individual things you're doing they're not really rooted in really realizing your end goal, even right towards the end of the game. You're just kind of doing things in order to get through the video game. Did you kind of get an idea? Did you feel the same way about this broad goal, James, that it was just like doing things?
Yeah, I think it does, like near the end of the game or at the very end of the game, actually come together to feel very cohesive. Like
Yes.
it feels a bit like you're linearly progressing through a series of rooms, like with no real clear goal. But in the end, like everything that you've done kind of comes together, and you can actually go back and explore previous areas to fix up things that you've missed. And the game is like constantly nudging you towards the true ending via like hints of various kinds. So yes, at the start, I think it's a bit of a fever dream. And honestly, the entire game is a bit of a fever dream, but by the end, it does actually feel weirdly cohesive, I think, but it won't feel that way until the very end.
Yeah, so you start off, you're a cockroach, you're trying to get through things, and we'll get more into the weeds of the story later. But where I want to start, James, is aesthetics. What this game looks and feels like.
Yeah, there is no other place to start because, like, I think that 90% of this game's even the gameplay like is kind of predicated on the visuals and the way that the world is depicted. So I kind of wanted to first hop back maybe to the intro cutscene, because
Mhm.
one of the this game kind of goes for this like photorealistic art style, with these really really detailed backgrounds and environments that you're traversing, like, and I mean incredibly detailed. I was like quite shocked by just how much like detail was in like the grain of wood of the bench that you're crawling over.
So this is because it was scanned in, right? Or there were photos that they took. How did they achieve this look?
3D scanning is, I believe, where the majority of this came from. I believe like a lot of the animal corpses that you find around the place were also 3D scanned in, and I completely believe that. I think like it's hard to find like modern games that have environments this detailed and realistic looking, so that's really like the only plausible explanation that I can give it. And there's like often these trends because the cutscenes in this game are actually live action FMVs, and there are these like transitions between like in-game in-engine like footage and the live action cutscenes that are basically seamless. There might be a little ripple effect or something like that to hide the exact instant where it happens, but like when you're immersed in it, you can sometimes not fully tell once it's switching over, which I thought was really cool. But to go back to the actual like intro to the game, this game is given in live action FMV, and it is fucking campy as hell, and I'm like 100% there for it. It's wonderful.
It's so bad. But it
It's
falls
so
into the
bad, it's
so bad
so
it's
good,
good.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like incredibly entertaining. It is this weird thing where the game is kind of going for this semi horror atmosphere, and these cutscenes dramatically undermine any attempt at setting up the atmosphere. But they're still entertaining in their own right.
I don't know if horror. It's not like
It's not
scary.
horror,
It's like it
yeah.
tries to make you like squeamish and uncomfortable.
But when you think of like Silent Hill 2 is the example I would come up with. That's a game that I think uses a lot of grossness
Yeah,
in its depiction of the world. Like it's a grimy, awful world, and I think that that griminess and disgustingness can be part of a horror experience. And I do think that on the face of it, this idea of being a cockroach, being
it's
incredibly
kind of.
vulnerable in the world, could be considered scary. So while it doesn't succeed as a scary game, I don't think it would have been impossible to achieve with some maybe slightly better acting in
Yeah,
these FMV sequences.
I kind of think that it works in the game's favor. Like I enjoyed the game more because of the campiness and the like stark contrast it was making from the like frankly revolting like environments that you're traversing much of the time.
I kind of to expand on this a bit. I had my notes a bit later, but I think this is a good point to bring it in. I do think that you're right that it does produce a unique kind of atmosphere with the campiness contrasted with the grossness of the world. But as I was playing, I was thinking that they could have leaned a lot more into the, I guess, alienness of the situation. An example of that would be there's these hint things around the world, and we'll talk about the gameplay ramifications of that later. But you get a bit where like an animal will come up and kind of psychically link with you and give you this weird prophetic indication of what to do in order to progress. And as that's happening, the lady prophet will be reciting like a poetic verse over the top, and as I was in these hint things, I was like, they could have made these so much freakier. they could have made these so much scarier and alien and weird, but instead they're kind of normalized by the person speaking over the top and rhyming verse. And I think that they made that decision aesthetically a fair few times throughout the game to lean more into the campiness instead of leaning into the true terrifying weirdness of the situation.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. Like, I think you need to have like, how do I put this? Like, the creepiness and the revoltingness. Like, really, the pressure is on during the gameplay, and the cutscenes kind of give you this like reprise from
Relief.
that. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that like ebb and flow is pretty important to have when you're doing this kind of thing, and I think. I'm glad that they used the cutscenes as the release valve and left like basically all of the gameplay is when the psychological pressure is on. I think that made for a better game.
I wouldn't say it would made for a better game, but I would also agree that it doesn't make for a worse game. It just means that a lot of the there's not as much tension in this game as there could be. For some people, that's going to be a good thing. For some, it's going to be bad. It just depends on the kind of experience you're after.
Mm.
But I never really got the feeling that when we did Gabriel Knight, which has, all of the voodoo stuff,
Yeah.
the voodoo stuff in that game had this sinister undertone to it that I think was much scarier than the voodoo or stuff in this game. And I think that they could have gone scarier if they wanted to.
Yeah. The story that the conclusion that the story was leading up to, I mean, and that's an intentional decision too, wasn't like as ominous as what Gabriel Knight was leading up to, I guess. But
Hmm.
they could have made it something different. But I think they had a fairly clear idea. They wanted this kind of like, I guess, wholesome ending for such an unwholesome game.
Wholesome family ending.
Yeah.
Okay. Next thing. So we've talked a little bit about how. Sorry, James. You mentioned something about that opening cutscene, and I distracted us away from it. Did you have something to say about it?
I just wanted to at least mention that there's this initial camera pan that like starts on this city bridge that goes all the way over the bridge and into the protagonist's bedroom, and the transition between outside and inside is like actually seamless. It was really well done. I feel like they put so much effort into all the cutscenes and the visuals, even though, they're campy as hell and it's got this real like B movie vibe to it, but you can tell that they were really trying like the whole way
Absolutely.
through.
The direction here is flawless. I think
Yeah,
that's the key thing.
absolutely.
And I think that carries on to the actual gameplay as well. And in many ways, to me, this is the genius of the game, and it's in its restrictive camera angles. So for the most part, this game is top down in the sense that you're always relative looking at the cockroach from an above angle, and that as the cockroach, you can be on walls as well as the floor, but you're always staring at the cockroach from above. And your camera and screen is very limited. So you might see the equivalent of, I guess, maybe 20 by 20 centimeters at a time, maybe a little bit more than that. Maybe it's more like 30 by 30 centimeters, but you only see a fraction of the larger objects that you're traversing over at a time. So if you crawl onto a desk, you might need to transition between 8 and 12 screens to travel across the entire desk. So not only does this give you a lot more detail of the environments you're traveling over, I think it does a lot to immerse you in the perspective of the cockroach. And although you're not seeing out of the cockroach's eyes, you're still seeing like a much more limited view of the environment than you would as a human being. And I think that if they'd given you the freedom to freely scroll wherever you wanted to go, and it was more of a point and click kind of game where you can move the camera around and click wherever you want, as opposed to a screen transitioning game with tank controls, that the game would be far worse for it. It would be far less immersive, and I think that the graphics would be far less impactful as they kind of hit you like a sledgehammer as you transition from screen to
Yeah,
screen.
I also think that this art style they've gone through with the like 3D scanning and like rotoscoping kind of thing works a lot better with these fixed perspectives. It's a
Mm.
lot easier. Like you can stitch like the images together, but it is a lot like technically more straightforward in order just to have these fixed camera angles. What I think this game does like incredibly well is that it really manages to capture the spatial awareness of where you are and like track that really well, because you're not just
Hmm.
like crawling on top of the desk, but you can also like crawl down the side of the desk and underneath the desk on the bottom like you could if you were a cockroach.
To add on to that, if there's like a bookcase on the desk, you can also go inside the bookcase. So not only are you going over and under and around objects, you're going inside objects on top of those
Yeah, like if
objects.
there's a tissue box, like you can crawl into the little gap and go inside the tissue box. Like there are these tiny little cracks like in the woodwork that you can crawl into, and there's actually like heaps of stuff behind there. And the game generally lets you know that these things are there because there's other insects in the environment that will, like, you'll enter a new screen and you'll see a cockroach crawl into this little gap where you would never have thought for there to be an entrance, but there is. And now that you know it, you can follow it and you can go in there and it can go for a while. Like, there's this section where you can crawl into like a medicine cabinet in a bathroom and it just keeps going and going. And you get to the top and there's this little like hole to slip in, and then you're behind inside the
Mm.
woodwork. It's crazy, like how much detail and how like logically everything connects together, and you can kind of in your head, because you're in a realistic environment, you can like put together what the bathroom looks like from, you know, all of these different screens that you've transversed through. It's really well done. It's definitely like the best part of the game in my opinion is how well this is done.
There's even stuff like sometimes you'll start crawling over something and you won't know exactly what it is you're doing. I was crawling across this, it's like a tube and it was curving round. And then all of a sudden I got to the end of the tube and transitioned onto something going down. And I'm like, oh, I'm inside the shower. And that thing that I just was crawling over was the rail that holds the shower curtain. And all of a sudden it made sense in my head how that 3D space fit. James, a very, very long time ago, we talked about in episode 2, we talked about Banjo Kazooie and how landmarks
Yes.
can help orientate you and stop you getting lost. I think that this game, with all of its unique artistry from screen to screen, is the perfect example of how unique geographical objects can help orientate you.
Yeah.
When you've traveled over an area and you know that you recognize that, you know, that open box of matches, you can track that in your head that there's an open box of matches there. And this game's, with all of its unique artistic shots, 4x4 without a scrolling screen, help you track where everything is in relation to everything else, even if when you first get to an area it can be pretty disorientating.
I feel like I want to talk about how the zoomed in perspective of the environment really, like, these environments are like kind of gross, and some of them are really gross, right? Like you're in a
Hmm.
kitchen and it's pretty dirty, but like it's quite dirty, but it's not like insanely like exaggeratedly dirty. But because
Yeah.
you're so zoomed in, even some kind of dirty things just seem like 100 times more disgusting because of how close to them you are.
It's not like the kitchen in Resident Evil 7. You know, when you go to the Resident Evil 7
Yeah,
house and it's just like
it's
just black goo and shit everywhere? It's not like that. It's just
it's like
that
it's
because it's
pretty
so zoomed in
messy.
on all the stains and everything, it makes me not want to take photos of my kitchen close up in
Yeah.
the fear that they might somewhat resemble these. It makes me want to go clean my kitchen bench.
Yeah, although to be fair, there are some genuinely like nasty images in this one. Like one of
Hmm.
the big one for me is like I think I was reading an interview and they got this like rat catcher to bring them a dead rat, and then they just like stuffed it with razor blades and then 3D scanned it. Like that's a scene in this game as you knock razor blades into a rat, and then one of the rooms is just like, you know, this fucked up gory rat on the ground. There's a
Hmm.
bunch of shit like that in this game, which is like not, you know, it's pretty. It makes me pretty squeamish, but it's not like the majority of the game, I don't think.
Well, I don't know. I got just as squeamish at the chili con carne bit.
Oh, that
That,
was
that was gross.
gross. Yeah,
And I love chili con carne, but that made me never want to eat it again.
yeah. Although the
Uh,
fish right next to her, like barely breathing and gasping for air on the counter, that was like, oh,
yeah, It's pretty
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 gnarly.
disturbing. Yeah. Basically, I find that the look and feel of this game, exploring it from the perspective of a cockroach, is, as you said, it's far and away its most impressive feature, and it's almost worth the price of admission alone. Like, it's just a incredible world to be immersed in, and everything they do is so laser focused on making you feel like a powerless little cockroach.
They really like put the effort into research. I looked at like in the credits and the effort they put into like there's just this list of experts on insect biology that they spoke to, and like they really animated your character's movement. Like I had a friend walk into my room while I was playing this game, and within like a minute he's like, I can't watch this anymore. It makes me too uncomfortable. It's like it just looks like a cockroach walking around some realistic environments. Like it's really hard to argue with that.
I really like the bit where you go inside. There's a big swordfish hanging on the wall, and you go inside the swordfish and see the wooden board that the swordfish is hanging on. And there's like termites and
Oh,
maggots have
so
made their
nasty.
home in the wood, and you kind of can see them as you're crawling through this termite hole. I mean, it's
Ugh.
just wonderful, wonderfully disgusting in every single way. I think this game absolutely achieves what it's trying to do aesthetically. It's in some ways it's one of the top 5 games aesthetically that we've done, I think, James.
This
Like, I think that obviously it's not beautiful, but it's
oh, it
gorgeous.
looks amazing. Yeah.
It looks amazing. Like, for a game that came out in 1996, it blows my mind just how good this game looks, and it absolutely holds up.
Do you think the fixed camera in this game looks better than in Resident Evil 1? Because we were high on that game, but I think this game might look better.
So the reason I would specifically, if we're talking about camera angles, I think the thing that edges Resident Evil 1 above it is that Resident Evil 1 has varied camera angles at different heights and perspectives.
Does this game
And
not?
it does have the occasional interesting shot, but for the most part, you are kind of hovering the same distance from the cockroach from a perspective above it. Resident Evil, as you walk through a room, you kind of get exposed to 5 different unique, interesting camera angles. And I think that Resident Evil even uses it in its gameplay, like that one famous thing where you walk through the door and the spider crawls down behind you.
Yep.
Fucking terrifying. I don't think this game does anything as creative with its camera angles. I do think that this game, with its, I guess, restricted focus in general, creates a more immersive kind of experience than Resident Evil does.
Mm.
But I'll take Resident Evil's artistic and varied direction over this one in a head
That game is like an actual horror game, and it makes me less uncomfortable.
to head.
Like,
Except for that one bit. Even
with
that.
the spiders, yeah, I played that whole
Yeah.
section like not looking at the screen.
I think that this might be a good time to go to the music, James. Did you want to start off with
Yeah,
your
sure.
thoughts?
So the music's quite atmospheric, and I think one thing that I've come to realize about atmospheric soundtracks is that they are inherently less memorable on their own, but they tend to make the games themselves more memorable. Like, there's lots of games with memorable soundtracks where you just remember the music. I won't remember the soundtrack of this game in a few months, but I will certainly remember the game, and it's not just because it's a game about a cockroach. I think the game's soundtrack does a great job of like trying to enforce all of the like the different types of atmosphere that's going on, from the creepiness in the gameplay to the pants on head campiness during the cutscenes. I thought it was really well done. There's no track here in particular that I'm particularly fond of, but I will like single out the bit that plays during the moth ride, as I thought that whole scene in its entirety was really cool.
So I think one of the keys here, and one of the reasons that it's less memorable, is I don't think this music has much melody to it. When I think of a game that's very different to this soundtrack that's still great, I think of Yes, Oath of Helgana. How do you say it? Is it Yes?
I
I
think it's
can't even remember
Ace.
how to pronounce it. East, that's right. Which is a game that has basically a lot of power metal tracks. And that soundtrack is incredible because those songs are incredible. But it's not like those songs are reinforcing the atmosphere of the game, or that game has a particularly compelling atmosphere.
What? It's hype as fuck.
It is hype, yeah. I guess it's trying to achieve a different kind of thing.
Yeah.
I describe the music here as reverb heavy, synthy, bassy. I think the key word I'd use here is discordant. This is
Yeah,
a discordant soundtrack. It's
it's
very
uncomfortable and disquieting.
uncomfortable and
Yeah.
yeah, off key. And I think that it does a lot to help round out all of those things we talked about, aesthetics, and creating this unsettling atmosphere. It's not a scary atmosphere. It's just one that makes you feel uncomfortable.
Makes your skin
Um,
crawl. Like,
yeah, as it should when you're playing a game with a cockroach. I do think that there was one super memorable track which we'll play later, which is one where you get inside the desk, which is filled with notes by your character, who is also studying a way to kill cockroaches. Oh, the irony. And you see all of his notes, and it's clear that the guy has a few screws loose, and the music changes to something very unsettling to reflect his, obvious descent into insanity, which I thought was very cool. It was very different from all the other music. So I thought that one was memorable, and that's one that will stick with me. But in general, I agree with you, James. I think it's a great soundtrack, but one that will is best paired with the game than listened to by itself.
man, that bit with the madness scene where you're going over his notes, there's like this newspaper clipping of an eyeball, and like you walk over it and then the eyeball comes to life and starts like spazzing out because there's a bug in it. It's so uncomfortable to watch. And I did it like 5 times until I couldn't deal with it anymore. So let's do the moth ride. I thought that section was awesome. And just kind of a good representation of some of the best parts of the soundtrack. So here we go. All right, we're back from our ride across the room on the back of the moth. How did you feel, Patrick?
Loved it. And now I want to talk about story. We've mentioned a little bit already, but I want to go a bit more in depth with this, James, because I think that we touched on how the story's FMV sequences are so bad they're good. But in some ways, that's only half of the equation, because this game is stuffed to the gills with environmental storytelling as well.
And it's quite good.
Yeah, so basically, as you're traveling around the apartment and everything, you're discovering details about both your landlord and your character, the player character, Roger Sams. So you learn about how he was an entomologist who's trying to develop a super killer poison for cockroaches specifically. You learn about the landlord's wife and her premature birth, which led to her dying. And all of this is told through newspaper clippings and bills and awards and all these and letters, all these little bits and pieces that you as a cockroach half the time you can't even read the whole letter at once. So you kind of have to be moving back and forth through the screen to get the information.
Yeah, and the newspaper clippings actually come to life and animate when you walk on them. Like the pictures come to life and talk, and like some of the narration gets read out to you. So they're actually pretty interactive for what could have otherwise just been, them expecting you to sit there and read it. And I kind of really appreciated that. Like in the bar, there's lots of story delivered to you via just photos that come to life and play a little scene. And I think that, the weird psychedelic, like, trippiness of the game, that really played into that, like, with your character, like, hallucinating these scenes or whatever the hell was going on. And it also served to, be a bit more interactive and engaging for the viewer than just sitting there, like, reading off a wall, which I'd be fine to do as well, but I'm glad they went to the extra
I
effort.
completely agree. Having both is better. They're complementary. It's not, and you're right that the psychedelic nature of it and the whole, voodoo magic of it fits these things coming to life. I will say that in many ways, one of the emotional cruxes of the story towards the end, when you get to a character's suitcase and you discover his
Oh my
doll as a
God.
baby and everything.
So good.
ends up being less emotional and literally laugh out loud funny. And I'm not even making it. I laughed out loud during these scenes where basically your character has been he was his parents gave him
Given
up.
up to an
Yep.
orphanage. Yeah.
He was given up to an orphanage, and there's a nun, and she's talking about how his dad doesn't love him, and he starts crying, and then she starts cackling at him crying.
Not like she's not like laughing a little bit. She's like cackling as hard as she can, and the camera's zooming
she's
in.
like
and
getting
like...
the energy from his tears, and it's so funny. It's just
she's like drinking.
Yeah.
It's so
and
good.
then it immediately transitions to a bit where there's a bully making fun of him for liking cockroaches. And smashes his glass exhibit, and it's so terrible. You can tell that the people who made the game just got their kids in, and they're just like, all right, guys, here's a scenario, go for it.
Well, they had that, like, he was talking to the lawyer lady, and it's not even like hidden at all that it's the same lady acting as the nun. Like, it's just so funny.
It's really funny. And it's all the more funny for the fact that it feels like so much care and effort has been put into, I guess, the artistic design and environmental storytelling and the writing of the letters. And then you get to these FMV bits, and it's like they've put $0 into it. It's quite hilarious. We have come so far with turning voice acting and in gaming into like a very professional, respected profession.
Bring it back. I want bring back the soul.
Oh my god, it's I mean, it, like I said, it does wrap around to being enjoyable. So this isn't, in some ways, this isn't a negative. It's just very it's very
so funny.
In some ways, we talk a lot on this show about aspects of video games where you don't really get to experience them again nowadays. And I think we mentioned this when we did Typing of the Dead. It's the same thing, right? This is the only real way to experience this kind of grade of voice acting. So I think overall it works in the game's favor for adding to the uniqueness of the experience, but you have to wonder what this game would be if it was unrelentingly bleak instead of with these comedic breaks.
I was watching this other review on the game after I'd finished it, because I was curious to see what people thought about it. And one of the reviewers referred to the main character as like bootleg Jim Carrey, perfect. And I just lost my shit. It's like the perfect description.
The way he speaks in the opening monologue, he's like putting a sneer into every single word.
Everything.
It's not every single line. He's got like a 90-second monologue, and you can feel the sneering, and it's just absurd. So spoilers now. How did you feel more broadly about the linking of the landlord being the guy's father and him being his son, and how it all tied together? Do you think this was well done, or did you find the whole mystic woman a little too cheesy and on the nose?
I think I would have enjoyed it more if there was more misdirection. I think it's incredibly obvious what's going on, like, way before the end of the game, and I think it would have been more fun if it was a bit less obvious. I think I was fine with the direction, and I was fine with the way the hints were presented. It was super obvious what the hint actually was, but the almost non-existent obfuscation with the poetry kind of made it fit better. And you understood that from the character's perspective, it was supposed to be maybe confusing, but as a player, it is actually just helping you to finish the game.
I thought it was so obvious that it was a misdirect. I was like, they can't be father and son. That doesn't make any sense. And then they just I'm like, okay, maybe this is just the story and that's all there is to it.
Yeah, I think it could have been more than that. And I think the game would have been better if it was more than that. But
I'm going to be honest.
I don't really mind, honestly. I would have liked the game either way.
I just found it hard to get emotionally invested in these characters when I found the story so funny. I think that was my problem. It was just so ridiculous that I didn't really emotionally care about these characters or what they were going through. The acting was just too bad for me. I agree it all comes together and everything's linked together, and there's lots of little details as well, like them losing their liquor license, for example. and how the business kind of fell into shambles once his wife died, and so on and so forth. Like it all ties together and it's cohesive. I just don't find it very compelling. Is probably the best way to put it.
Yeah, I think that's fine. It was enjoyable, I found, and I liked that there was multiple endings depending on how well you did, sort
Hmm.
of. I found them, pretty mostly pretty satisfying. I liked how the true ending just had them like cackling like maniacs at the end on the beach.
As he
Like
continues to do research on cockroaches, it's so good. That's just the
it's like
guy's
nothing's
lifelong dream.
changed.
All that shit happens
Yeah.
to him, and he's like, "Yep, I want to continue studying a pesticide for cockroaches. Fuck cockroaches."
Or just like the bad ending where he's in the mental asylum, just like screaming in the
I
straitjacket.
mean,
Like,
after reading some of those notes, maybe he deserves to be. Oh, that's actually a very non PC thing of me to say, James. He deserves to receive mental help for his problems, is what I mean to say.
I think he's a schizo and should be treated
Wow,
accordingly.
James. Amazing. Yeah, so story wise it's mixed, but I think it ultimately ends up positive in spite of the fact that it's mixed, or maybe because it is. James, this is a video game. Should we spend some time talking about the gameplay of this game?
There's actually not a lot to it.
Yeah, what's the
You
control scheme? Like,
actually,
like I open up the controls. It's a pretty complicated set of controls, isn't it?
yeah. So you have the arrow keys.
You can press space to bring up the menu. That's the menu where you load and save, not the menu where you access your inventory.
Inventory.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the arrow keys. That's the entire
It's
way.
the whole game. Yeah, the arrow keys in the control setting. Like you can't rebind the keys. There's just this like toggle between arrow keys and WASD. That's it.
And so I would describe the gameplay of this game being basically exploration and maybe light puzzle solving. I guess you could call it like an adventure exploration light puzzle kind of game, but it's mainly
It's like if there's one step above walking sim, this is it basically. Like
it's mostly a linear game. So you would contrast it to something like a point and click adventure game where you have an inventory, there's different people to speak to, you move between different areas, and then you need to use things in the right combination to move the puzzle onwards to the next stage. This is not like this. There is usually one thing to do. There might be two things to do, but you usually can't do thing two until you have completed thing one, and you
hmm,
also get some detailed hints as to what it is you need to achieve on for every single puzzle in the game.
yeah.
So it's almost all laid out in front of you, but you do need to do a bit of exploring to find all the relevant elements because
Yep.
you don't, because of the limited perspective, you can't see everything at once. So there is a bit of moving around and figuring out the different paths you can take. There are some like mini maze like sections, I guess. There's a lot of pesticide and water and paint and chili con carne that as a flimsy cockroach you can't cross.
And slippering on the toilet bowl because you can't grip it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so
And,
there are
and
dangerous areas you can't go. So it's a lot of
and cats, the
and
cat.
cats that insta kill you if you go too close to an area. Um, so usually what happens is you'll get to an area, you'll walk around and explore, kind of make a mental map of where everything is, eventually find a hint of what it is you need to do, or just stumble into it yourself anyway. And then you can progress through the game. And I think that with a reasonable amount of time, you shouldn't have most people shouldn't have any issues getting through this entire game without ever looking at a wall.
Yeah, I agree. I actually really liked that they had that hint system where the bugs would kind of walk in the direction you need to go. It got
Hmm.
me out of, a bit of confusion a couple of times. And I think it was quite necessary with how hard to see some of the holes are. But I actually think including those difficult to see entrances really added to the immersion of the game and that feeling of being an insect. So
Hmm.
I think this is an absolutely brilliant decision by them to include this kind of hint because it really allows them to reap the benefits of those little nooks and crannies without completely dumpstering the gameplay and have because if they didn't do this, you could theoretically like wander around lost forever because you didn't try to go behind the TV or go into
Hmm.
this like millimeter sized hole on the desk, you know? So that was really well done. And you mentioned that the gameplay is quite simple, the control scheme is simple, and it's funny. I think some games this would have me, bored to tears. Like I just wouldn't play it very far because there's nothing to do. But the environments and the traversal and the storytelling in game is just so good that the thing remains engaging start to finish, and it really doesn't need that kind of intense gameplay to keep you invested. Like the world design's just so good that I was happy to play start to finish just to see the next screen, for like 4 hours.
And each area is so diverse. Like the kitchen bench is so different from the basement. The basement, which is littered with dead animals. And then you go to the kitchen bench and it's all food, disgusting food. Like it's not like it's repeating on a theme. It's each and every area is unique and interesting in its own way. The big problem I had with this game is not the controls of the cockroach itself, which are tank controls, which work completely fine and they're very fluid. But I would
The
say it's
nudging
your
of
the
objects?
nudging of objects. It
Yeah,
is
it's really
horrifically bad.
bad.
It's frustrating because I would say the majority of the puzzles require nudging of objects. So the problem is the objects there are specific objects in the game world that can be moved by you as a cockroach. The vast majority you can't. You're just a little cockroach. But there are some things like there are some cigarettes. There are some bits and pieces that can be a pill, tiny things. But a lot of these objects only seem to move along specific unspecified tracks because they don't want you pushing the object into a random direction and getting it stuck, I guess.
Yeah.
So you get this weird thing where you don't quite know how to orientate yourself in order to get the object to go in the right direction. And if you're like me, sometimes you don't even aren't even aware that an object can be nudged after ramming into it several times because you don't hit it at the exact right angle,
Yep.
which is what happened to me. There's this bit where you have to push a medicine bottle to push a pill out of it. And I tried to do it. I was like, oh, this must not be the thing I meant to do because nothing's coming out. Only to look at a walkthrough like an hour later to find out that I hadn't hit the medicine bottle at the exact right
That
angle.
that specific one's the worst instance of that by far, I think.
Yeah.
But like in general, those things, like there'll be like a peanut or like the cigarette or the little lava in the box, and you'll need to spend a while, like, because you got tank controls, you need to like back out, turn to the like side, go around in a circle, awkwardly turn around to try a different angle if it's not working. So it's quite a bit of trial and error. Like it's not like so bad that I ever stopped playing the game or put it down for a while, but it is like quite annoying and definitely the worst part of the game.
It's weird to me how bad this is. Like they put like I said, the only thing I can think is that they really didn't want you just pushing the object off screen and getting it stuck.
Which I think is reasonable, right?
Just make it when you come back to the screen, it resets. Like that's a more elegant solution.
Mm,
Also, this game has lives for some reason. I don't even know why. If you
yeah.
run out of lives, you just respawn. I was just using saves, so every time I died, it didn't matter. I just reloaded a save. But I don't really understand what the point of lives in a game like this is.
Yeah, I don't know. I
Holdover from early 90s arcade games.
yeah, I guess I kind of yeah. I think there should have been like checkpoints or something, maybe. I don't know, or just
No, it
make
doesn't
you
need
reload a save.
checkpoints. Just loads and saves, and if you die, you just respawn. Like you just
And I
don't.
died to that cat so many times trying to go down like a ledge, and it just like eat. Man, I watched that animation of the cat eating the cockroach, and every single time I was like, "That's so gross. Put that down."
Cats love cockroaches. My sister's cat murders them like mad. They're good to have around.
Cockroaches.
Cockroaches. Yeah, I love having cockroaches around.
Yeah, just like swimming in a sea of them. Mm.
But yeah, I think that the gameplay here is like fine, but it's not really the focus of the experience. You're not playing this game for the gameplay. It doesn't get in the way. And I think that you can count the exploration of the environments as gameplay,
Yeah.
and trying to find where to go and what to do. But it's barely a puzzle game. The puzzles are very light. It's probably better because of that. Like I can imagine this game would be frustrating if you were stuck on something for forever. This way you get to kind of like move through the aesthetic visual feast bit by bit.
What a feast it is. I don't have any other major points, so let's go to the last music break and then we'll wrap up, shall we?
Yeah, I don't actually know the name of this track. I was only able to find it in a playlist with
Wow.
all of the music. Hey, I did do some looking, but it's the bit that plays when you're at the insane man draws.
Certified schizo call, let's go.
Oh damn it, James.
Alrighty, that was the track that Patrick was too lazy to look up the name of, and
Oh
me, I
come.
was too. let's go, let's go to final impressions, shall we? Pat, how about you start?
This game's an easy recommend. It's weird because it's not like I love this game to pieces or anything because it is ultimately a very simple game. But what's here from an aesthetic point of view in terms of how it looks, how it feels, is amazing. And the gameplay is such a light touch that it's not enough to detract from it. I do think that the cheesiness and B rated part of the story did hold this game back from greatness from a point of view. If this game had committed to its griminess and weirdness all the way through, this could have been a horror game on par with some of the greats. Instead, what we got was a different kind of experience that is equal parts grimy and horrific and also camp and hilarious, which I also think is enjoyable in its own right. And I think it's done well here and it's enjoyable for what it is. I just can't help but think of what once was. My only major gripe with this game really is the way the objects, the way you interact with a lot of the objects in the world. And that ends up being quite annoying because with a limited control scheme, interacting with the world by bumping into it is a significant part of the gameplay, but it's not enough to hold it back. So I would happily recommend this game to anyone who likes unique or interesting games, and I'd recommend it to anyone who enjoys your classic adventure games of your Monkey Island kind of games for a different kind of take on adventure gaming with an unforgettable look and feel.
Yeah, I think this game is absolutely an easy recommend. I think that if you can get past the revolting aesthetics, and I think there's going to be a few people who can't, but I think if you do, then you are not going to find another game like this probably anywhere. And I doubt there's another one like this coming out anytime soon. Bad Mojo was fantastic. I think the visuals are incredible. They've held up, fantastically. Like, this game looks gorgeous in some senses of the word. It actually looks truly revolting in most, but that's definitely the point, and it succeeds spectacularly. The 3D navigation in this game is like second to none, and the way the levels are constructed spatially is just really something you have to experience. I think that, the story was very silly and funny. I don't think it's like the main appeal of the game for sure, but this campy FMV voice acting brought me a lot of laughs throughout the playtime. The puzzle solving's a bit lacking. The object pushing sucks. The game's save kind of bugs you out and moves you around the place, but other than those like mostly minor gripes, this is a really unique 4 hour experience that you're just not going to get anywhere else. So Bad Mojo is an easy recommend from me. I think does something very well, and no other game does it. So
Yeah, I'm pretty glad I picked this one in the end. It ended up being better than I expected. I thought it might have been,
it's a bit of a
horrifically.
coin flip, right? Like it could have been
Yeah,
terrible from the reviews, but it was really good.
I was
So
really worried about the puzzles being impenetrable, but it was the opposite in the end. So thank you so much for listening to us talk about Bad Mojo. I'm Patrick Arthur, and my co-host is James Turlings. We are the Retrospectives podcast, and you can find all of our content on our website, which is rspodcast.net. Recently, I've uploaded the entire series to YouTube, so if you prefer to listen on YouTube, everything will be there. I'd like to highlight two things. The first is our Discord server. A Discord server is where we do all of our interaction with our community, and it's also where we take game recommendations. So we would love if you would drop by our Discord server, join the community, throw us a recommend, let us know what you think. We're all ears, and we're always on the hunt for new and, well, not new, old and interesting games. And we also have a Buy Me a Coffee page. If you love the show and you'd like to give us some monetary support, we'll pop a link in the show note. And you can either set up with us with a subscription, or if you just want to do a one-off donation, that's okay as well. So with Bad Mojo out of the way, my pick of the past 3 weeks is completed. What are we playing over the next 3 weeks, James?
yeah, so let's go to something with a bit more of a approachable aesthetic for the next one. I'm going to pick a game that we have been requested a few times, and I almost picked many times before. We're going to go with Advance Wars 1, which is, a turn-based tactics game that's had a remake recently. And I've, been wanting to play this again for a while. I've played it a few times, growing up. And I always kind of liked the approachable aesthetic and fun tactical gameplay. I suspect this one's probably going to be a bit on the easy side for us these days, but I think the core gameplay is going to be pretty solid, and I'm looking forward to playing it again. Have you had any experience with this one, Pat?
So I have played a little bit of it because I used to download Game Boy emulators to dabble in these kinds of games, for Pokemon originally, but then I tried the early Final Fantasies, and Advance Wars is another one I tried, but I didn't get very far into it. I'd played a lot more Panzer General, to be honest, and Panzer General is a game we did, a while ago. That game was released, I think, in 1991. And I think that Advance Wars can very clearly trace its roots to Panzer General. So while I haven't played a whole lot of this game, I have dabbled in the genre a decent amount, to the point where I'm pretty sure I know what I'm getting into, and I'm not too worried.
I don't see the comparison, honestly, other than it's about war and there's tanks, but
Yeah,
we'll
what
get
mod do you
into
want?
that.
It's the same as Red Alert 2. They're all the same game.
Advance Wars much easier to get running than Red Alert 2.
That's
thankfully.
true.
Yeah.
What isn't? But yeah, I'm keen to give it a proper try from start to finish. Yeah, the only thing I'm worried about is that I'll breeze through it too easily. But maybe it will kick my ass. I guess we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. All right. Thanks for listening to the Bad Mojo, guys, and we'll see you in 3 weeks for Advance Wars 1. Catch you then.
Adios, everyone.